right, everyone. Welcome to a surprise episode of LA Rams Central. I've got a crossover here planned. Before I get into what we're going to be doing today, and it is a we, and no, it's not Eric. I didn't get a chance to do this yet because I really wanted to kind of get into the stuff that we missed, knowing that the episodes are going to be pretty big. But for all of the military men and women out there, I just want to say thank you for your services and the sacrifices you make for our country. We are better because of you, and you all are the true 1% in this country. And we love you, we thank you, and we adore everything that you do. And honestly, I don't think we do enough for you guys. So thank you for all the services that you've done. My father was a Vietnam vet. My grandfather, World War II. I've got a buddy that I've known since I was 6 who's done 3 tours in Afghanistan. LT, who I've got here on the show, is also a vet. So just thanks, guys, for everything that you do. I want to start with that. And then jump into the show. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be covering just Rams. That's all we're going to talk about. No need for a timestamp. And without further ado, for the first ever crossover issue, it's LT from Combat Sports L.A. Take it away.
Anthony Manning, my good friend. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm very humbled and honored to be crossover show with you. Notes from Combat Sports Talk Los Angeles. Anthony Manning is a good friend of mine at LA Rams Central. He's definitely helped me along the way to start up my channel. So there's words can't describe how thankful I am to have him as a friend. And just putting the two knowledges together on our Rams and how they're doing at 7-2 is very exciting. Our subscribers have crossed paths between both our channels, and we work very well together, and there's no competition in that sense because we agree on the same things. Yep. And I'm looking forward to doing this show with them. And so, Anthony, back to you.
Yeah, what I really like about your show is that you go in depth really on the Rams. I cover kind of everyone, but with a Ram focus, and then you kind of go into a little bit more detail on just the Rams, and your videos are much shorter, which I know the fans appreciate too. So as far as how we're going to do today, we're going to break the show down into 3 segments, everyone. We're going to start with the Rams versus Vikings, and I'm going to cover history, overall record, the general disrespect. Second segment is Rams schedule versus the other top 3 teams, meaning Philly, New Orleans, and Minnesota. And then the third segment is just a little Ram history lesson on their 7-2 record and their road record, which we're going to talk about. We're also going to touch on whether or not this is a Super Bowl team under the second segment. So before I get started, I wanted to give a shout out to Cliff Truesdell. I'm sorry if I said that wrong. I think it's Truesdell.
It's Truesdell.
Yeah. He made a really good point on my show that I just posted, the 66th episode, on the X Factor between the Rams and Vikings, and he's so right. I'm going to go through all of their playoff games and some of the regular season game history on where that X Factor really just comes out of nowhere in an odd way. There's always something that, and it usually favors Minnesota, that ends up hurting the Rams, which I'll get to. Also, She Got Sports is the gal that I was talking about. She does a Giants recap. She's really high on Jared Goff. She's a really good listen. Highly recommend you guys tune into her show. She's got some quality information, and for a young kid, she really seems to not only know her stuff, but she knows it a lot better than anybody on the networks or ESPN or any of those shows. So I want to give those shout outs. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the history. So let me ask you a question, LT. How much about the Rams-Viking rivalry, being a younger fan, do you, and I don't think you're necessarily a younger fan, like I think you followed the Rams, but young as far as age, what do you know about the Ram-Viking history?
Well, Anthony, like I said, I call you Yoda for a reason. You know tons of history. You followed them up to St. Louis. I know you mentioned your channel. You've been a fan for an extremely long time. In terms of my history, I don't know too much on the Rams and Vikings history. Like I said, I mentioned to my channel, I am a newly LA fan. I have no problem mentioning that.
Nice.
I'm one of the people that was born in the 80s. So when the Rams and the Raiders both left in the 90s, I kind of was, in that young sense, all about football, but didn't really identify with the team. So I kind of was all over the place, liking different players and teams. And with the Rams coming back to Los Angeles in 2016, that's obviously when I built my faithfulness into watching The Greatest Show on Turf with Kurt Warner, Marshall Faulk, Isaac Bruce, Corey Holt. is really my knowledge on how well they did. And I can't recall too many games back when they played the Vikings, but it was very fun watching them there. But yeah, in terms of my history, I don't know too much there. I just remember the Vikings and the Cowboy games a lot.
Yeah. Well, being a I guess a Ram historian, if you will, I wasn't alive for the torturing years of the 70s and the 60s with the Vikings. I did live through the 80s, which had a little bit of a sting, which I'll cover. I was born in 79, started following the Rams in 84. And the Vikings have always just kind of been a thorn in Rams' side over the years. Our record against Minnesota all time is 26, 16, and 2. Minnesota leads the series. As the LA Rams, we are 12, 20, and 2. And as I said on my show, we're 4 and 6 in St. Louis. But no disrespect to the St. Louis fans. We love you and we want you to stay Ram fans. But I'm not going to count that for the purpose of the oddity of what happens with the Rams in LA, which I'm going to get to in my next show later, possibly tonight. But there's always an X factor. Cliff is completely right. You go back to 1969 when these two teams first played. They were 10-1 versus 10-1. Might have even been 11-0 versus, or 10-0 versus 10-0, something like that in the regular season. And Minnesota won in a really cold, hard-fought football game, which gave them the home field against the Rams in the playoff game. And in that playoff game, we lost 23-21 because of a safety early in the game that we were never able to really recover from. And then you fast forward to 1974, and there was a false start, or maybe that was the one with the blocked field goal. One of them, 74 76. There was a fourth, I think that was the one. There was a false start that didn't happen. Actually, yeah, that was 76. So 74, there was a blocked field goal that the Vikings took back for a touchdown. I'm sorry, I'm all discombobulated. But in 74 and 76, these two instances happened respectively. In one of the years, there was a false start, and on the next play, the Rams threw an interception. But no one moved on the Rams' offensive line. You can go back and look at the footage, and as Cliff accurately stated, even the guy, our announcer was like, no one moved. Nobody moved. But they nailed us on a penalty that didn't exist. Then the next time we played, we decided to kick the field goal instead of go for it. And they ended up blocking the field goal and taking it 90 yards for a touchdown because we couldn't punch it in from the one. And that ended up being the difference in the game. And then you go to 77, where we were a favored team, and you had the Mud Bowl, a torrential downpour that made the field completely soggy and muddy, which benefited the Vikings, not the Rams, costing us the game. Then you had the blowout in 78, but then in 79, we don't beat Minnesota, we don't go to the playoffs, and we get a touchdown pass from Nolan Cromwell on a fake field goal in overtime to win the game. And then we lose the next week to New Orleans inexplicably. But it didn't matter. We'd wrapped up the division at that point. Then you go all the way back to 88, and you've got the 2 picks by Jim Everett in the first 2 drives that lead to 14 Viking points that we never recovered. We lost that game 28-17. And then you go to 99. In overtime in the regular season, we get a friggin' safety on a block punt that gives the Vikings the win. And then you even go back to 99 when the Rams played Minnesota, and you had that crazy final 2 minutes that seemed to take forever that the Rams were able to prevail and win. So there's always something when these two teams play. And I think the X factor in this game, I have to agree with Cliff again, is Case Keenum. We know Case Keenum better than any other team in professional football. We know, and we know what he's capable of. We know what he's not capable of. We know what his weaknesses are. And he doesn't have a running game to really lean on because we're going to stop that. And the Viking defense, I'm sorry, but Seattle's defense is better, and we played that and tore it to shreds. Dallas's defense is as good when they were healthy. We tore that to shreds. I think the Redskins defense, when it's healthy, is a top 2 defense in the league, and they're decimated with injuries, but we played them when they were healthy. I just think the Rams are battle-tested in Minnesota as far as playing quality opponents. I don't think Minnesota is. But that's where I want to touch on, LT, and I want you to take the lead here. On the disrespect, I'll talk about what I've heard, but what have you heard in the talk this week leading up to the Ram and Viking game?
So, yeah, Anthony, the disrespect is just as I mentioned in my channel and videos, and just what you mentioned, it gets amusing after a while because week after week after week, the Rams just continue and continue to shut the haters up and they surprise people. Leading up to this, I watched, besides your channel, I watched the Ram channel, I watched NFL Network, ESPN, that kind of stuff, just to get an analyst on it. People, for the most part, it's 50-50. They'll usually root for, they'll pick the Vikings or they'll pick the Rams. Battle tested, and I don't want to sidebar, with the Cincinnati Eagles coming up the horizon, which we're going to talk about later in the segment. The Vikings are one of those teams that are supposed to be tough on our schedule. Just like you mentioned with Case Keenum, I don't think people remember how disastrous last season was with Goff and Case Keenum being under the tutelage of Fisher. And with the two different offenses that they're in now, they're flourishing. But you're absolutely right that Case Keenum is now he's in a different system. But the Rams, as a whole, completely know his game style. And I didn't even think about that. That was a great point you made. Our defense is gonna crush him. Just knowing his mannerisms, the way he puts under pressure, and the way he throws and whatnot. But to answer your question, what you're saying with the analysts is like we're 7-2, and for the last 3-4 weeks, just getting a win because I believe we've been on a 4-game winning streak. Correct?
Yep. Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So after week and week, it's like okay, you're not. So we beat Houston, right? We beat who do we beat? We beat the Jaguars in London. That was supposed to be a strong defense right there.
Cardinals in London.
Yeah, that's right. Cardinals, sorry. And then we played, we played the Jags, Cardinals, and the Texans, and those three have good defenses, in my opinion. And when you say battle tested, Jared Goff, that really strengthened him in learning how to deal with adversity, just like last week's game showed in the first half how frustrated he was at the Coliseum with Houston, and it was just all Greg the leg kicking the field goals, and then whatever Sean McVay turned to him into the back half, not just him, the whole Rams as a whole, they just lit it up, and they went away from that adversity, and that's the kind of stuff that you want to see from a young quarterback, is when your back is against the wall, you want to see how they're going to do under pressure, and Jared Goff is showing it, making week after week, and, with Carson Wentz taking the spotlight on how our Philly's doing, sidebar again, I don't think Goff is getting that respect that he deserves, which we'll cover onto there, but that's pretty much what I've heard on there. And so, honestly, Anthony, I've seen the 50-50 where people are like, this could go. Minnesota is favored on paper, Vegas odds and whatnot, but I think it's pretty 50-50 from the people that I've watched the different shows on who they're picking between the Rams and the Vikings. Did you want me to break down more in terms of what I think the game out goes, or just kind of like what you were saying with the pregame?
No, I think we just stick to it because we've got 2 other segments to go through. I don't know how long the show's going to go, but you made a point that I like is the fact that it's 50-50, and it just seems like, Jared Goff can throw for 355 yards and 4 touchdowns. Oh, wait, he's done that. And he doesn't get any respect. And then Carson Wentz throws for 199 yards and 4 touchdowns, and he's the greatest quarterback since Joe Montana. And I'm like, okay. And then you look at the schedules. I mean, the Colts are bad, granted. Washington, we both played. Washington beat us, but Washington was healthy. San Francisco, that's a rival. You could compare that to the Vikings and Lions. But then we got Dallas, Seattle, Jacksonville, Arizona, as opposed to Tampa Bay, Chicago, Green Bay, and Baltimore. They played Cleveland. We played New York. We played Houston. They played Pittsburgh. They played Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh. I think the Rams defense is better than the Steelers. To me, they're a paper 7-2 team, and I'm not going to be surprised if the Rams win this thing by 17 points. I wouldn't be surprised if it was 34-17, and I think I'm being kind giving Case Keenum 2 touchdown drives and a field goal against this football team. But
you and me discussed earlier before the show that the Rams with the London game, which you did like, I know you meant very much. They've really played 5 big games, and they've won all 5 and won. With a good score. What you think on that?
Well, yeah, I mean the Rams on the road, they're unbelievable, and I'm definitely going to touch on that too even later. But they're technically 5-0 on the road, not 4-0, and because their home game against the Cardinals wasn't a home game, and I just think that they're battle tested. Minnesota on the road this year has only played 3 road games, and in those 3 road games, that's at Chicago with a rookie quarterback. That's at Washington, who is dinged up, and at Pittsburgh, and they're 2-1 in those games. And really, the Chicago game was really super close. So was the Washington game, which they almost blew. As opposed to looking who the Rams have played on the road, which we'll take a look right now. The Rams on the road had to go to New York, East Coast to West Coast. They played San Francisco. Okay, that's a gimme game, fine, rival, whatever. At Dallas, at Jacksonville. And in London, which is clear across the country. Yeah, the Vikings haven't seen anything like what they're going to see, and to me, I'm done with the disrespect. They're never going to pick the Rams, and when they do, like everyone says they're going to be a playoff team, but they're acting like this team can't go far in the postseason, and I just scratch my head on that.
Okay, so I'm going to say my part, and what I say here is that you're absolutely right. With the Vikings schedule, as I'm looking here, and I'm going to do my take on it. So they beat the Saints when the Saints were 0-2 before Drew Brees and company really showed what they had to do, right?
Right.
They beat them there. They lost to the Steelers, where the Steelers have kind of been a seesaw team because now Ben Roethlisberger and Juju Smith and Troy Brown, all those guys are starting to
click.
Come from there. They were struggling in the beginning, but that's a good team. I'll give those 2 games there. But you're absolutely right. They beat the Bucks. Okay, the Bucks are
garbage.
Doing well with Ben company. The Lions, they lost to the Lions, and Matthew Stafford. I don't know what Stafford we're going to get week by week. So the Lions have kind of always been one of those teams where you just don't know how they're going to do. Okay, they lost to that team, so that would work me as a Vikings fan. And you look at the last 4 wins here, just like to piggyback what you said, they barely beat the Bears by a field goal, okay? Mm-hmm. With the rookie quarterback, Trubisky, if I said the name right. They beat the Packers at home, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm a diehard Aaron Rodgers fan. Aaron Rodgers was hurt. What?
Yeah, they injured him in that game in the second quarter.
Yeah, so he got hurt there, so of course you're going to win that game. And then they played against the Ravens, with the Joe Flacco. We don't know with his offense. The defense is great, but the offense has been hit or miss there. And then, of course, you're going to beat the Browns, one of the worst teams in there. So, and then the Redskins, they beat them in Washington, which was a good game. They beat them by 8 points there. But when you said those things, Anthony, that the Vikings don't scare me. You're absolutely right. I look at this schedule, I'm like, yeah, they have not played the team that we did. They haven't played the team that comes to.
No, and I will give the Vikings credit. They're technically 4-0 on the road because that was a home game in London against Cleveland. So, I forgot that was a London game.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that too. I know that one.
So, as far as the Rams' chances this season, when the season started, I said the Rams would win their division, but I figured they'd maybe win a wild card game, lose in the second round. They were kind of, depending who they played in the wild card, they might not even win. Now I'm starting to think that this team is going to go to the conference championship game. I don't see them getting past that point, depending on who they play. But you've kind of been saying for the last few weeks that you're really starting to buy this team as a Super Bowl contender. And I'm starting to agree with you, LT. So why don't you tell the fans why you think it's a Super Bowl team?
So I have to say from what I predicted on my channel, I think I said 8-8, and then towards as the season started, when they start off the season kind of slow, they got the win in Indy, and then they lost the following week, and they started, and then we're at that 3-2, 4-2 mark, and that's when I was kind of like, okay, we're looking back at last season, and now they're starting to really progress. And granted, most of their games were in the month of October or on the road. I changed my pick to 10-6, and week by week, as Sean McVay really shows how great of an offensive mind he is with the Rams, I start to believe more and more because of how much trust he has in Jared Goff, and puts that offensive scheme to work. But my biggest reasons why they're going to win the Super Bowl, if they get there, they still have to get to the NFC conference and beat Philly, which we're gonna touch into later, is that it's coaching. Anthony, if you guys watch this man's show here, I don't call him Yoda for no reason. He knows so much on coaching from what he did, correct me wrong, when you were in high school, right? You
Yep.
did some college, right?
High school, yeah.
Yeah, the coaching, it starts from the top, just like you mentioned before, I am a veteran. My channel is veteran friendly. Good leadership can, when it goes to football or the battlefield, it can take you a long way. If you have bad leadership, that can really take a unit or a team downhill. And people fail to forget that Sean McVay is, yes, 31, youngest coach in history to go and coach a head team, right? And especially at where they're at right now. The last coach to do that was John Madden back in the 80s, and I'm sure Anthony knows this very well. John Madden ended up winning a Super Bowl with the Raiders down the line there.
76, yeah.
Yeah, and Sean McVay, with how humble he gets, is that he hired Wade Phillips. The immediate day that he got hired, and I was looking at all the alerts, is that he's like, I have to get Wade Phillips. And that was just tentatively speaking. There was no guarantees or nothing that he was going to get Wade Phillips. And that's what ended up happening. So you show there that your weakness is in defense, your strength is in offense. You go and you hire one of the best defensive coordinators, and feel free, Anthony, if you know any history on those, because I don't know too much on Wade Phillips' history besides going to Carolina and San Diego. I think he was a head coach at one point. Yeah. You're hiring one of the best defensive coordinators of all time, in my opinion, to come in there. And then John Costo, our special teams coordinator, interim head coach last year, you know what he does with Greg Zerline, Johnny Heckler, and the returners we have there. Yeah. It's a very complete team. And the thing what I love about this team is week by week is when the offense is struggling, the defense steps up. Not like last year where the defense and special teams carried everything.
Yeah.
Everything gets meshed together. Yeah, go ahead, Anthony.
Well, I was just saying, to touch on the coaching thing, Wade Phillips was in Dallas, obviously. He had coached in Denver way early on in the 90s. One of the best D coordinators of all time in the history of the NFL. I would definitely put him in the top 30. And that's saying a lot considering how many D coordinators there's been in the past. There's no question what he's able to do in year one when he gets there. It's unbelievable. He's led the team to the postseason almost every single time in his first year. But it's what he did in Denver. And what excited me about the Wade Phillips pickup is I think the Rams' front seven is better than Denver's front seven. And I know what Wade Phillips did with that crew. I cannot wait to see what he does with this crew. And I don't even think it's done yet. And it's been a slow burn. Leadership goes a long way. When you are able to be humble enough to allow for the guy that the players love, that was the interim head coach, to stay on staff in a major role like special teams coordinator, I think says a lot about your confidence in your ability and who you are and your ability to lead a team. John Madden led the Raiders to something like 5 or 6 straight conference championship games in the 70s. Won a Super Bowl in 76. Should have won again in 77 if they had been able to beat Denver, and that still wasn't a fumble. I'm sorry, I don't care what anyone says. Or was a fumble, I should say. Lytle wasn't in the end zone. It should have been the Raiders' ball, but that's a whole other story for another time. I think they could have repeated that year and beaten Dallas. But then, of course, he retired and became one of the greatest broadcasters of all time, and I will argue with somebody till I'm blue in the face on that. But, leadership takes a lot of different forms. I think for me, I look at this football team and I say, what to me makes them a Super Bowl caliber football team? The defense is improving every week. Jared Goff has arrived, at least this season. Again, like I always say, I'm not going to toot my horn and say, see, he's not a bust. We need to see this again next year, but it's trending in the right direction. And I will never go too early on a quarterback, good or bad. It's not in my nature. But, and then you look at the running game, you look at the special teams. I'm going to get to weaknesses in a minute, but they're good on all three phases, and they're getting better. Look at the kick return, right? We had all those problems with the punt returns at the beginning of the year. What did they do? They yanked Tavon Austin out. They put in Pharaoh Cooper. They clearly worked with Pharaoh Cooper because he's been unbelievable as a return man since the Seattle game. Really, the week after that when we played the Cardinals in London, I think he had a hiccup. But other than that, actually, I take that back. We went to Jacksonville. In 1 week's time in training him, look at how far along he's come. And I think he should have been the returner the whole time. But
oh yeah, by far.
Either way.
I got the projection there too before the weaknesses there. You make excellent points, just like you said on the strengths. Jared Goff is like, and one of the things I respect about your channel is that I remember when I was starting up my channel and I would talk to you through the videos, and I would tell you, I was like, Jared Goff, I don't know if I believe in him at the 4-12 season. Is he a bust or not? And you kept telling me, you're like, LT, stay patient with him. It's gonna take 2-3 years to build a good quarterback. And just like you said, in his rookie season, this is his rookie season as we speak, because that was not fair to him to put him in week 7 under the tutelage of Fisher, right? Yeah, you remember talking about that?
Yep.
Okay. And Jared Goff, I was reading up on him, is that as he improves to Sean McVay, this goes back to the humbleness of coaching, is that Sean McVay got him private coach. I don't know if you know this. So he has who's the quarterback coach? It's something like
Winky, Chris Winky, I think.
Okay, yeah, and then there's a guy that has the same name as Olsen, like Greg Olsen, the tight end. There's another guy on there. I don't know if I just hearing that name, but But Jared Goff has a special quarterback coach. I guess he works, after practice or whatever, that coaches Tom Brady, Matt Ryan, and Drew Brees. With the exception of Matt Ryan, because I think he's overrated, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, idol is Joe Montana, Jared Goff wears number 16. Those elements right there is what's going to make him an elite quarterback. Because at 22 years old, he is humble enough to sit there, work on his craft. And the thing that I love about Goff is that he never complains. He doesn't blame his teammates. He has a poker face. And when he takes sacks, just like last year, and he throws interception stuff, he'll show he gets mad, and then he brushes off, and he works when he has to. And that's what you want as a quarterback and as a leader.
Well,
and yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, on Jared Goff, I mean, for me, you don't hear about this with Carson Wentz, right? Oh, Doug Peterson's made Carson Wentz, but you hear that about, McVay making Jared Goff. I think McVay, I know coaches. McVay saw Jared Goff. I know for a fact after he got the job, he sat down and looked at him one-on-one and went, holy crap, there's some talent here. It was obvious to see from even his Cal days. This is why I was torn on the Wentz-Goff deal on draft day. And when I heard them make the comparison to Joe Montana, I'm like, well, that's it. I'm done with that. It's obviously got to be Goff. But Wentz is going to be great too. But the thing about Goff that stands out for me is he's gone through something Carson Wentz has not. He went through that 4-12, 0-7 season with awful coaching and nothing around him. And he picked himself up. He dusted himself off. He got a taste of Bill Belichick. He got a taste of New Orleans and Sean Payton, which was his best game last year by far. And the reason I made such a case for him, I think the strongest case I made for him was the episode where I absolutely just lambasted the NFL and their whole position on 0-7 and making the decision. And when I made my comments about Troy Aikman's career and how it started, I think it goes a long way. But you see that he works with Todd Gurley, Sammy Watkins, Tyler Higbee, Cooper Kupp. They're buddies. Like, those guys are really good friends off the field. Those are the things you want to hear as a fan. And as a coach, you just go home and you fist pump when you walk in the door because you know your nucleus is tight. And when your nucleus is tight, you can withstand injuries even to people within that nucleus because they'll pick one another up. It's a crucial aspect that nobody talks about. So, weaknesses. I'll touch on this first and then I'll let you go. When you tell me that the Rams' biggest weakness is their schedule, you're telling me the Rams don't have a weakness. And that's exactly what happened on Undisputed. I'm watching Undisputed, and they're like, the Rams' weakness is their schedule. I'm like, oh, okay, so they don't have a weakness. That's good to know. I agree. I happen to agree. I think the Rams keep getting better and better. And when you're going to sit there and tell me that I'm supposed to be afraid of the Minnesota Vikings, that's like telling me I'm supposed to be afraid of a gnat. Okay? I'm sorry, Viking fans that are out there. Your team isn't scary. Your quarterback's Case Keenum. You have no running game. Your offensive line is banged up, and you're going against a real defense for the first time really all year long because of the paper 7-2 football team in Pittsburgh, which I don't even really count. They shouldn't be called the Steel Curtain this year. They should be called the soaking wet paper defense this year, because if it isn't for their offense, they're not going to do much. And when they play a real team, and please AFC, let me know when real teams are going to start playing in your conference. Yeah, it's going to be Pittsburgh and New England, and it's going to be fun to watch the Super Bowl because Pittsburgh and New England are going to get annihilated by the field in the NFC. There is no New Orleans is a scary team because they do run the ball. They do have a good defense. Philly's a scary team. Everyone else on the schedule, Seattle, not afraid of you. I'm sorry, we should have beat you the first time. We gave you the game, and you barely won it. Minnesota doesn't scare me. Arizona, Blaine Gabbert scares me a little bit. I'll get to that, on my own show when I go solo here tonight. But not enough to sit there and go, the Rams could lose that game. San Francisco's a rivalry. I think the Rams still have that 22-21 loss at home last year, still on their taste buds. And they're a much different team than they were in week 2. Who's on the schedule that scares you besides those two? I look at it and go 12-4. I'll take it. Your take.
Yeah. So, wow. Yeah, you made just great points there. The terms of schedule, after talking to you, I was a little worried with the Vikings. And once you mentioned that, we know Case Keenum and how he plays, I think, now that you brought it up, we're going to walk over him. And, I think one thing we forgot to mention with Wade Phillips' 3-4 scheme is how that worked well with the defense. And that's a benefit to us because Case Keenum was used to the 4-3 and the way that the defense played last year. He's going to be completely thrown off with this 3-4 scheme that Wade Phillips has implemented. And I didn't even mention that Mark Perrin, when he got moved from safety to linebacker, Robert Quinn got moved over there. The addition of, who's the guy from Houston, Anthony, that coached with Wade Phillips, or he was under him? Is it Connor Barwin? Connor Barwin?
Yes, Connor Barwin, yep.
Yeah, that front 3-4 right there is just scary. They are going to be rushing Case Keenum. I don't know how strong that offensive line is for Minnesota, but they are going to be putting some pressure on Keenum. And most of the secondary, I think, was last year there with Keenum. So that is a disadvantage to Keenum because the secondary knows exactly how to throw there. And I'm curious what your take on that. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm sorry, it was Webster that worked with Wade Phillips in Denver, the DB. But Connor Barwin and Robert Quinn are a lot like Von Miller and DeMarcus Ware were, which they just have to learn the system. You want my take on what? I'm sorry, I want to make that clarification. Then I want
your take on the 4-3 to 3-4 and how that's going to throw off Case Keenum.
Well,
and how our defense knows him.
As far as a 3-4 goes, he knows the 4-3 from practicing with the Rams. The 3-4 is going to be different as far as I think he practices against it too because I think Minnesota runs it. But there's a big difference when you've got Aaron Donald and Connor Barwin and Alec Ogletree, and you bring in a guy like Littleton, who I think is one of the best untold stories in the league this year, and Longacre, who I've been high on for the better part of 3-4 weeks now, and he just keeps popping on the screen. Blake Countess is starting to catch the football in the secondary. He hasn't seen this team before. The Rams have seen him. And, I personally think the 4-3 defense is harder to run on, but I think the 3-4 defense is harder to pass on. And, I think that's bared fruit for the Rams this year because I don't see the Vikings relying too heavily on the running game, knowing they've got to block Aaron Donald and they have no one to block him. So I do think it's going to hurt him. I think it's going to throw him off because the guys you have Robert Quinn at defensive end. Now he's playing outside linebacker. Yeah, he's still rushing the passer 50% of the time, but you know what? 50% of the time he's going out there in the flat. And you're not used to somebody that big, that fast, and that long playing in the flat. And you're looking at him, and then your attention's diverted from Longacre, who you really didn't know well last year at all because he didn't play much. now is going to come over and knock your ear hole to the other side of your face, yeah, it's a problem. So, yeah, I definitely think it's going to be an issue.
And to finish to that, because I don't want to sidebar too much from that, is Michael Brockers. I was reading an article the other day.
Oh, yeah.
We mentioned about him. He's kind of that unknown, but we know him type player that he had a great game in Houston last week. In fact, when Aaron Donald, they were contending him, Michael Brockers was getting in there. What's your take on him and how well he's in that defense?
I think Aaron Donald's silently having, or Brockers is silently having a Pro Bowl season. I think of anybody that has benefited from the 3-4 defense, I think he's the one that's benefited the most. Putting him where they've put him, utilizing him, giving him rest when they need to. I didn't know how Brockers would do in this system, and I was about ready to give him the bust label, but towards the end of last year and this year, he's really, really stood out. I think he's having a great year. I'm going to go into a little bit of a Ram history lesson here, because I think it's pretty clear the Rams don't have a weakness, and that bodes well for us. And being road warriors, 4-0, 5-0 on the road, I think has a lot to do with where we're at. But in Rams history, when they've gotten off to a 7-2 start, they are 9-0-1. Now, here's why I have a 1 in the tie column. In 1949, they were 7-2-2 at one point. So for me, it's kind of hard to. They weren't truly 7-2, but I'll give it to them. In those 9 times, 10-0-1. In those years, the Rams 7 times made it to the conference championship game. I was right, 9. Sorry, I was right, 9. All 10 times the Rams have made it to the postseason. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah. So all 10 times that the Rams have been 7-2, they've made it to the postseason. 7 of those 9 times they've made it to what was either the Super Bowl or the conference championship game, or in the case of 50 and 49, what was equivalent to the Super Bowl back then. They're making the playoffs, and I think at this point that speculation's got to be gone. I know we're looking at their schedule and go, well, the experts are saying the Rams could go 10-6, but I 9-7, but I think that's a joke. The Rams are set up perfect. Yeah, please do.
So, well, we're sitting at 7-2 here tomorrow, and granted, we could go 8-2 tomorrow. Let me finish what I was going to say about kind of complete sidebar from what you were asking me about our schedule. With the light, we can go 8-2. We have a tough schedule with the Saints. We get at home in front of our crowd. That's the game that worries me, because how well Drew Brees is doing with that offense, and their defense has done very well. In fact, I have one of their guys on. I have the defense on fantasy with the Rams. So that's a team that scares me. The Cardinals don't scare me. I know that you mentioned Blaine Gabbert. I didn't even know that he became the starter, but I still thought it was Drew Stanton. The Arizona Cardinals, and I know you live up there, and they're kind of a hit or miss team. Except in the Super Bowl last couple of years and being in the playoffs. And I know it's always been Seattle's NFC West division. The Cardinals have kind of been that second place thing.
Yep.
I think we're going to destroy the Cardinals. Like I said, worry about the Saints. Then the Eagles. So what's ironic is that we get 2 guys who we could possibly play in the conference championship or in the playoffs. The Saints at home and the Eagles at home.
Mm-hmm.
Those 2 scare me, like I mentioned there. Between those 2, I really think, and how exciting it's going to be, is I think the Eagles and Rams, just because Carson Wentz, the way that he's performing right now, he's doing a phenomenal job, and they're supposed to be moving that game to possibly a Sunday night game, which I think would be very exciting, way more entertaining than other games, and our Rams need to be shown on prime time. We need to, and I think after this season, maybe we can do a possible crossover, talk about it. We need to go over next year's schedule and see the Rams need to be put on Monday night football games, Sunday night games, and not these London Thursday night games.
Yeah.
But I'm not sidebar from that. Between the Saints and the Eagles right there, now that I'm tracking my statement, I think the Saints are much tougher just because Drew Brees has been improving. He's been to the Super Bowl. He's won. They have some good season vets. They have some good young vets there. And the Eagles had a great season last year, but you made a great point where we were talking prior is that Carson Wentz did not go through what Jared Goff had to go through last year. And in terms of toughness and adversity, he has a great offensive line. He's really, and not to say that Jared Goff doesn't have one either, but I just think Jared Goff is way tougher than him, and mentally he's much there. And I like Carson Wentz, but I don't think he has that, that matureness and that what Jared Goff had to go through.
Well,
and that's going to be very fun to watch. Go ahead.
I would only want to caution. I don't think Carson Wentz has a great offensive line. I think that's one of their big bugaboos and what could hurt them against the Rams. I think that he has a comparable line to what Goff has. The difference is he was the golden child coming out. He'd never really experienced any kind of adversity against the media. He didn't get hit nearly as much as Jared Goff. He didn't have a coach that didn't like him like Jared Goff did. He didn't have a system that wasn't – it wasn't that the system they were running was archaic. It was the way they were calling the plays was archaic and predictable. Run, pass, punt. Run, pass, punt. Run, pass, run, punt. They just never – it was archaic in the way they were calling the plays. I don't think the system itself was archaic. I agree, though, the Cardinals, not so much, but the Saints and the Eagles do scare me. But here's something to think about. We beat Minnesota. We come home. It's the Saints' running game that scares me because if you go full bore to stop it, Drew Brees is good enough and he will beat you. But overall, the Rams against the Saints are 27-24. Okay? They lead the series. Against Philly, as the L.A. Rams, they lead the series 12-10-1, but the Eagles lead the series 20-19-1, so that's a pretty even series. Against the the Seahawks are leading that series, unfortunately. I won't get into that too much, but the Rams are going to start gaining, I think, in the next couple of years. And the Cardinals were basically tied now in that series, and I think we'll pull ahead with this win, if not make it a tie at the end of this year with a victory. Then you look at Tennessee. Our record against the Titans/Oilers, we're dominating that series. It's 8-4. We're 5-2 as LA Rams. We're 8-4 overall. And then from there, I think the only other team we play is San Francisco that's on the schedule. So there isn't anybody on our schedule left that we don't traditionally do well against. And when you look at it on paper, I just think the Rams are a better team. No, go ahead. So,
like I said before, that hasn't changed. Between the Vikings, the Saints, and the Eagles, those are the three losses, not in a row, or what I'm saying is that we can take from those teams possible. Okay? So that respect the Vikings, even though what we're breaking down here, I haven't really given my score prediction yet there. With the exception of the Saints and Eagles, like I said there, just like you said, I'm not worried about the Cardinals. The Slocks, or whatever you call them, there's a bad taste in our mouth. And I actually went to my first Rams game, as I told you, this year against the Seahawks.
Yep.
Now, let me tell you, it was nice to see that we had enough LA fans there, but those Seahawks fans really got under my nerves. And when you turn over 5 times in the game, and Jared Goff didn't believe it was his second game, right? Second to third week, I think it was week 3, maybe week 4.
Oh, no. When we played Seattle?
Yeah. When we played Seattle at home.
No, that was what, 5 games ago. So.
Right. It was a home game, but what I was trying to get at was that with the 5 turnovers and then Jared Goff throwing an interception towards the end, we should have won that game.
Well, don't forget Kupp's drop.
What's that?
Don't forget Kupp's drop in the end zone that would have won the game.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly my point. Is that's how close you were, and seeing how the two teams now, because the Rams have been considered the Seattle's little brother. I think that's going to be changing, just like before. We're going to be now the big dog in the NFC West and become the big brother. Because if you guys don't know already, for the Seahawks, Sherman is out for the season, and then Chancellor. Anthony talked about this. He is out too. So that secondary is going to be hurting with those 2 veteran presences there. And Russell Wilson, even though they're going to be up in Seattle, they were putting a beating on him in the Coliseum.
Yep.
And so that's an easy win in my opinion. And then the Titans, Mariota has not been playing up to par. And I don't know how their offense team. I mean, they got their butts kicked by Pittsburgh. I know I was watching your video yesterday on that, and I'm not sure which direction the Titans are going right now. There. And then the Niners and Rams game. We already beat the Niners this year, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we beat them. So the Niners are going to be a special one because we didn't forget last year what happened when they embarrassed us. And that last game is going to be even more special being played at home. So to wrap that up right there, you're absolutely right. I think we can wrap it up between possibly a 12-4 season. It just depends on there. Or even at this point, we can go all the way to 14-2. It's just so exciting but tough to really estimate right now.
Well, I do believe the Rams will split the Seahawks, the Saints and Eagles game. It irritates me when I hear that the Seahawks were their little brother. I'm like, shut up. We're not their little brother. The reality is that they are an overrated bunch of blowhards. And the best part of the Seahawks is this. Their fan base, when the Seahawks are doing well, they come out like cockroaches. When the Seahawks stink, they're nowhere to be found. And right now, the Seahawks' future is like the light switch you turn on in the morning, and when you live in a really bad, apartment, and all those cockroaches go scurrying away. The light switch has been turned on to Seattle. People see them for what they are, and all of their fans, like the cockroaches they are going to go scurry off and go hide in their holes, and you'll never hear from a Seahawk fan again until they start winning again. I've never seen a Seahawk fan prior to them having this run. And I live in Arizona, and they're everywhere now. So unless they just randomly decided to all leave Seattle at the same time, I'm calling BS on the fan base. They're a bunch of bandwagon folk, just like the Patriot fans. And when they lose, it's going to be really irritating to see, because I do think the team that's going to replace the Patriots and Seahawks is the Rams and Eagles. And it's going to be really irritating to see all of the Ram and Seahawk paraphernalia around here in Arizona. I'm going to want to seriously go off on someone, but I guess you take them where you can get them, and you just deal with the fact that you have some people that aren't loyal and some people that are. But I just find it funny that Seahawk fans think they have the right to be arrogant when it's like, we have the same Super Bowl record you do, bro. We're 1-2 in the Super Bowl too. So why don't you calm down, okay? Talk to me when you're actually a dynasty. And how about you go to 6 out of 7? I'm sorry. How about you go to 7? I was right. 6 out of 7 conference championship games. Then we'll talk. Because that's what the Rams did in 73, 74 through 79. So I can't stand Seahawk fans. They're fake. They're phony. And they're...
Anthony, I got to say something too. As much as we dislike our opponents in the AFC West, it's been a very good conference now the Rams are coming up. If you think about this last decade, the Niners and the Seahawks have been to 3 Super Bowls, right?
Yep.
And then Arizona won against the Steelers. And that's something kind of, reassuring. We play in a good division.
We do.
Right now we're at the top, right?
We do. And I'll tell you, the Garoppolo pickup for San Francisco, Blaine Gabbert, I think he'll pan out in Arizona better than they think. Jared Goff in L.A., Russell Wilson's still in the prime of his career. I think we could end up with 4. I think the quarterbacks in our conference could theoretically in about 5-6 years, and obviously Blaine Gabbert's going to be the unknown factor in this equation. I think we're going to end up with 4 of the top 10 quarterbacks in football when all is said and done at some point. But that's just because I'm a big fan of Garoppolo. No, I agree completely. Overall, I think the future looks good. I can't wait to see this game. You talked about doing a live stream. We'll work on that. But we'll wrap it up here. Hope you guys enjoyed the crossover issue. This was all Rams all the time. I'm Anthony, and I got LT here on the phone. LT, anything you want to add before we go?
Anthony, that was so fun to do with you. And as the loyal subscribers to LA Rams Central and Combat Sports Los Angeles, Anthony and I can't thank you enough how loyal you've been to us and helping out both our channels and going back and getting 2 different perspectives. Like I said, Anthony specializes in not just NFL as a whole. And now I'm starting to get that bug because I know quite a bit of football with Eric. I've obviously honored enough to talk to him on here. Maybe down the line, I'll start branching off and talking more about that. But until then, I'll just be continuing Rams. And we just thank you for subscribing to our channel and just showing the love and support there. And Anthony will be doing a couple of crossovers with me and Mike. Possibly, we're doing live stream tomorrow, right, Anthony?
Yeah. You talked about doing that, so I'll definitely call you in. Or I'll call in and we could do it that way.
Perfect.
Awesome. All right, guys. Thank you once again. All the subscribers, please comment. Tell us what you thought about the show down on the bottom. And one last time, thank you for all of those men and women that have served for our country. You are the true 1%ers. God bless you and have a wonderful weekend.